So the topic is on the regulation or implementation of the regulation of invasive species or invasive alien species in a vulnerable semi-enclosed or enclosed seas as Adriatic is. Invasive aquatic species present a major threat to the marine ecosystem, and shipping is identified as a major pathways for introducing species to the new environment. The problem increased with the traffic. The traffic volume is expanding in last decade, in particular with the introduction of steel hulls, allowing vessels to use water instead of solid material as ballast. Obviously, when we have an oil spill, it is pollution. We need the response of the state, but oil pollution is dispersal of the oil pollution in a certain period of time. And if on the contrary, if we have an alien species entering in the ecosystem, they multiply and spread. So the problem is quite significant. About the definition of the alien invasive species, there are many definitions, different definitions. If we are looking at the interpretation of the International Union of Conservation of Nature, guidelines classifies a species as alien if it occurs outside its past or present natural range. So if it is outside. According to the Convention of the Biological Diversity, an alien species as a species is when it is introduced outside its natural past of present distribution, which means a certain movement or influence by a human activity. There is always a human activities somewhere here. And in the guiding principles, there is also a wording that the alien invasive species, a species whose introduction are spread and threat to biodiversity. And in the guidelines, there is a wording that this is an agent of change which treated native biological diversity and ecosystem. So in short, we have native or indigenous species, we have non-native species or non-indigenous species, and we have invasive species, or better to say, invasive alien species. Native species are all organisms that have occurred or may occur as a result of natural process. There in each ecosystem, it's unique with its own native species. Non-native species are plants and animals living in the area where they don't naturally exist. Often they were introduced by humans. And finally, invasive species or invasive alien species are non-native species that cause harm to the environmental, economic, human, and animal or plant health. This is a presentation about the invasive alien species. So a little bit of provocation on the left side of the you have two cormorants enjoying without intruder in the coastal area, and on the right side of the is it a social housing in the suburb area of the large city, or what is this on the right side?
It's the alien invasive species.
Yes, yes, but it is a large. It is a large cruise.
Was not one of mine.
Yeah, and the invasive species is over there in the middle of the. So invasive species constitute the second most grave danger to marine biodiversity after habitat destruction, huge risk to human health, for instance, cholera bacteria in Latin America, then clogging infrastructure, ship fouling, fishing industry, blocking cooling system and engine. They have its biological impacts, economic impact, and social impact. What is important, once again, to mention that they do not dissolve or become less noticeable over the time, but have the reverse effect to the ecosystem. Human vectors and routes that there are first at the very beginning commercial shipping with ballast and fouling of hull, fishing gear, corridors, recreational activities, agricultural activity, artificial structure. We have here an example of introduction of Caulerepa taxifolia from the world famous Oceanographic Museum of Monaco, with the entrance ticket of some 20 euro to enter in that museum. They used this taxifolia for decoration, and it entered in the ecosystem of the Mediterranean by wastewater of the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco. So you have this Caulerepa taxifolia here on the nearby island, because it's spreading in the whole Mediterranean Sea. About the commercial shipping, ships and floating structure are vectors for alien species. Ballast water, sediment, fouling hulls, all parts actually which are in the contact with the surrounding seas as anchors, sea chests, and so on. Ballast water is quite known, and it was already suspected in last century as a factor of introduction of non-native species. The ballast water tanks of fully loaded ships usually also contain ballast water. It is technically almost impossible to pump all of ballast water. Then vectors are also harbors, and hull fouling is the second most important vector, even with numerous anti-fouling methods applied. Small boats contribute strongly to invasive alien species, because they have long dwell time. They are for a long period of time in the marina, practically. In the case of Croatia, for almost 10 months, they are parked in the marina. Recreation boating functionally reassembles commercial shipping. It's almost the same situation, except that hull fouling is a dominant vector. Melting ice could also allow shipping companies to use new expressway to their vessels, and it will be a new vector of invasive alien species. If we look at the so-called sources of law, we have conventional biological diversity. It requires, as far as possible and as appropriate, I like that wording, as far as possible and appropriate, to prevent the introduction, control, and eradicate those alien species which threaten ecosystem, habitats, and species. This is, let's say, a positive approach. But if we look in another article, they call for national strategy plans or program for conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. So actually, they don't contain no specific stipulation regarding the protection of marine ecosystem. While in theory, there is a prevention or precautionary approach, this is by itself, it does do very little to advance consistent international technological standards and performance in eradication of non-indigenous species. About the guiding principle, there are also a guiding principle connected with or embedded in the same convention. The idea is to control or eradicate those alien species which threaten an ecosystem. There are a number of guiding principles, maybe too many guiding principles, and 7 objectives. So, the guiding principle is a precautionary principle, 3-stage hierarchical approach, ecosystem approach. There is a guiding principle dealing with the role of state, research and monitoring, education and public awareness, border control, exchange of information, cooperation. Then there is a part dealing with intentional introduction of alien species, unintentional mitigation, impact, eradication, containment, and control. They should be integrated with 7 objectives. The first is to increase the awareness of the problem, so to raise an awareness, to encourage the prevention, to minimize a number of unintentional introduction, to ensure that there is no intentional introduction, to try to eradicate a control campaign dealing with that subject matter, to find the comprehensive framework, and to encourage necessary research in that field, which is not only from the legal side. Legal side is only part of that research. If you look at the UN Conference of the Law of the Sea, there is an article which deals specifically with invasive species problem. Its scopes allows for measures of preventing the introduction of invasive species and control of already introduced species, but there are no measures eradicating such species. So it's obviously the convention is from 1982. Now if we can maybe evaluate how it could be interpreted. Invasive species, is it a form of pollution or only a danger to the marine environment and then a pollution? In the term that pollution is interpreted in the way inter alia includes the introduction of alien species, then there will be several other provisions. So it's better to say that it is a pollution. Obviously, if it is an alien species, it should be a substance or a form of energy, biological pollution. Marpol and London Convention do not cover a living organism at all. And there are some regional sea convention which are focused on the invasive species. About the ballast water convention, the convention requires all the ships a ballast book and sediment management plan and ballast water record. And there are various standards. Not to enter in the details, I should only mention that the second stage regulations, so-called Regulation D2, it's new from practically from the 8th of September, so it's brand new, and it covers approved ballast water treatment system and states the maximum amount of available organism that can be discharged in the sea. So it's very complicated for lawyers to understand all that details. And to look at the work of the International Maritime Organization, there are guidelines for control and management of ships biofouling to minimize the transfer of invasive aquatic species. Very important. And there is also a guidance for minimizing the transfer of invasive aquatic species or fouling for recreational craft. Those are small craft, or relatively small craft, less than 24 meters. And if we are looking at the International Convention to control a harmful anti-fouling system of ships, that convention is focused on the prevention of adverse impact from the use of anti-fouling system in the biocide then may be contained, rather than the prevention of transfer of invasive aquatic species through half-fouling. So it's quite different. At the level of the European Union, in my opinion, European Union has a strange attitude to everything. so there is an invasive alien species regulation dealing with a subject matter. That's a good thing. But the European Commission is responsible for complying the so-called list of the invasive species. The list is as it is written of the species of union concern. So there are some of union concerns and some were not of union concern. Species of union concerns are, however, only species that inter alia are alien to the territory of EU as a whole, which is a ridiculous thing. It's the same for France and Greece. So this contradicts the ecosystem approach and may limit the effectiveness of the instrument if not changed during the legislative process. And finally, we are always mentioning the famous Marine Strategy Framework Directive. It has a descriptor of good environmental status. I should mention that EU environmental law is concerning environmental issues still requires improvement, to be very diplomatic. And about the Marine Strategic Framework Directive, it says that we are looking for a so-called good environmental status. So there are many strategies. We like the word strategy. Today, everything is strategy. It is a strategy to have a break, coffee break. So the idea is to protect and preserve the marine environment, prevent the deterioration, prevent and reduce inputs in the marine environment, and so on. And in one of the annexes, actually the Annex 3, there is a list of so-called pressures on the marine ecosystem. It is mentioned in introduction of microbial pathogens element and the so-called non-indigenous species and translocation. So they are not mentioning invasive species, but only non-indigenous species. And finally, what should be the management action or the governance action? There are a lot of possibilities. From action 1 to here, it is action 11. Politicians like action 11. Action 11 is doing nothing. Action 1 is physically remove the species, which is almost impossible. Action 2, rehabilitate the environment. Action 3, encourage target removal. Action 4, deploy biocide in the sea. Action 5, promote native consumers that feed the invasive species. So the species should feed the invasive species. Apply biological control. Apply genetic approach. I'm not sure that this is a proper way. And education and public awareness. As you can see, the action 10 and action 11 they are nearby. Education and public awareness. And to conclude, invasive alien species are a subset of non-indigenous species that have the potential to spread and have an adverse effect to ecosystem functioning, biodiversity, social and economic values at the very end on human health. Whether or not it's possible to protect marine ecosystem effectively from the risk by invasive alien species depends not only from further introduction being prevented, but also depends on the international community taking effective measures to tackle climate change. So we should think about climate change as well. And the final sentence, proportionate restoration measures should be undertaken to strengthen the ecosystem resilience towards invasion, to repair the damage caused, and enhance conservation status of species and their natural habitats. Thank you.